Justin's neighbor, Karen, was anything but friendly, never a smile, never a greeting. Yet, she had no issue making herself at home in his pool. The first time he noticed her was early in the summer, lounging on a float with sunglasses, completely at ease. Confused, he approached and politely informed her that she was on private property. Karen barely reacted, lazily waving him off like he was a minor inconvenience. "It's just a pool," she scoffed. "What's the big deal? We're neighbors." At first, Justin chose to ignore it, assuming she might not have realized. But it continued. Every few days, Karen would stroll into his backyard as if it belonged to her, sometimes even bringing friends. Frustration grew, yet he kept his composure, repeatedly reminding her she was trespassing. Karen, however, always had an excuse. "This whole area was built for the community," she argued one afternoon while dipping her toes in the water. "If you can afford this place, then I should be able to use it too." That statement sent a chill down his spine. It wasn't just Karen's entitlement, it was the way she carried herself, as if she believed a black man owning something so nice was a mistake that needed to be corrected. Justin tried one last time to reason with her, hoping she'd finally understand. "Karen, I bought this house. This pool isn't public. If you want to swim, you can join a club or get your own." Her response was instant and dismissive. "That's ridiculous," she scoffed, standing up and drying herself off with one of his towels. "People like you shouldn't be so selfish." Justin's patience was wearing thin. It was obvious now, Karen didn't just see his pool as hers to take. She saw him as someone who didn't deserve to have it. By the time she left that day, he knew being polite wasn't enough. Something had to change. Justin had dealt with entitled neighbors before, but Karen was on another level. Sneaking into his backyard like it was a public park was bad enough, but the way she acted like his ownership was an error made it infuriating. Enough was enough. The next morning, he took action. He installed a high-quality lock on the gate, added security cameras around the perimeter, and put up a sign that read private property and no trespassing. For the first time in weeks, he felt some peace. It lasted exactly 2 days. On the third afternoon, a loud rattling noise came from a backyard. Justin checked the security feed on his phone, and there she was, Karen, gripping the locked gate, shaking it violently. Her face was red with rage, and though she was muttering to herself, he could make out bits of it. Unbelievable. How dare he? Through the camera's microphone, he watched as she pulled out her phone, pacing in front of the gate. Moments later, sirens blared in the distance. Justin sighed. He already knew what was coming. Within minutes, 2 police officers arrived. Karen rushed toward them, waving her arms dramatically. "Thank God you're here," she shouted, pointing at the house. "That man is threatening me. He locked me out for no reason. He's trying to intimidate me." Justin stepped outside, keeping his hands visible to avoid any trouble. "Good afternoon, officers. What seems to be the issue?" One of the cops, an older man with tired eyes, gave Justin a once-over, then glanced at Karen, who was panting like she had just run a marathon. "She says you threatened her," the officer said cautiously. Justin didn't even blink. "I haven't spoken to her today," he replied, "but I do have security footage." Karen's face twisted in panic. "He's lying," she shrieked. "He's been harassing me for weeks. He put up that lock just to keep me out." Justin pulled out his phone, tapped the screen a few times, and held it up. "Actually, I put up the lock because she keeps trespassing on my private property, and I've got the video to prove it." He handed the phone to the officer, who watched in silence. The footage was undeniable. Karen, shaking the locked gate, throwing a tantrum, trying to force her way into the pool area. The second officer leaned in, his eyebrows raising slightly. After a moment, the older cop turned to Karen, his tone firm. "Ma'am, this is his property. You don't have any right to be here." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. But he's being unfair," she sputtered. "He's trying to keep me out on purpose." Justin raised an eyebrow. "Yes, that's exactly the point." The officers exchanged looks before one turned back to Karen. "If you set foot on this property again, you'll be arrested for trespassing. Do you understand?" Karen's face turned an alarming shade of purple. She let out a frustrated growl, spun on her heel, and stomped away. Justin shook his head as he watched her go. He knew this wasn't over. People like Karen didn't just let things go, they retaliated. But what she didn't know was that he wasn't done either. And he had an idea that would change everything. Justin had dealt with entitled neighbors before, the type who thrived on arrogance and saw themselves as superior. But Karen wasn't just another nuisance. She had a mean streak, a sense of ownership over things that didn't belong to her, and worst of all, a complete lack of shame. After the 911 incident, he expected her to back off. Instead, she doubled down. She glared at him whenever he passed her house. A few times, she even stood on her porch, arms crossed, muttering under her breath. It was clear Karen wasn't done. And neither was he. That night, Justin sat at his computer and started digging. If Karen was going to make his life miserable, maybe it was time he learned a little more about hers. At first, a basic background check turned up nothing unusual. But when he dug deeper, combing through public records, old newspaper archives, and ancestry websites, his stomach turned. Karen's family had a long, ugly history. One that stretched back generations. Her grandfather and great-grandfather weren't just clan members, they were leaders, holding high-ranking positions in one of the most notorious branches of the KKK. Old photos showed them in full robes, standing beside burning crosses. Newspaper clippings linked them to violent rallies and hate crimes. But didn't stop there. Karen's parents had their own history of racist activity. While they hadn't officially been in the Klan, they had donated money to white supremacist groups and attended protests against desegregation. Justin leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. He had suspected Karen's entitlement ran deeper than just personal arrogance. But this was generational. No wonder she had reacted so violently to a black man owning what she believed should never belong to someone like him. Just a good man from a different time. Justin let out a short laugh. A different time? Karen, your family wasn't just from a different time, they were active participants in hate. And now the world knows the truth. Karen's hands trembled as she gripped her phone. You think this is funny? My job is calling me nonstop. People are threatening me online. Justin met her glare with an icy stare. You had no problem trying to ruin my life, Karen. Falsely calling 911, harassing me, trespassing on my property. Now you're facing real consequences for your actions. Feels different when you're on the receiving end, doesn't it? Karen's face turned an even deeper shade of red. She opened her mouth to fire back, but nothing came out. She was losing this battle, and she knew it. Over the next few days, things only got worse for her. The article had spread far beyond their neighborhood. Local activists began demanding that Karen face legal consequences for her false 911 call. Her employer, now aware of her actions and her family's history, distanced themselves publicly, placing her on indefinite leave. Neighbors who once ignored her behavior now whispered about her in hushed tones. Karen's throat was dry. Her lawyer whispered something, but she barely heard him. The heat of a room, the weight of stairs, it was suffocating. A trickle of sweat ran down her back. Not guilty, she croaked. Judge Harris gave a measured nod and turned to the prosecutor. Proceed. The next 30 minutes were brutal. The prosecutor laid out the full story, Karen's harassment of Justin, the fake 911 call, her online threats, and finally, her desperate attempt to run from the police. Witnesses took the stand, including Justin. The damning security footage played, showing Karen throwing a tantrum by the pool, rattling the locked gate, and screaming at officers. Karen squirmed in her seat, her complexion shifting from red to pale. Then the judge spoke. Ms. Reynolds, your actions are some of the most brazen examples of entitlement and discrimination I've seen in this courtroom. Karen pressed her lips into a thin line. You repeatedly trespassed, attempted to manipulate law enforcement against an innocent man, and demonstrated a blatant disregard for the law. Given your history, I have serious concerns about your behavior. Do you have anything to say before I proceed with sentencing? That's when Karen snapped. She shot up from her seat, the chair screeching against the floor. This is bull, she shrieked. You're all against me. This whole damn thing is rigged. That thug set me up. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Her lawyer buried his face in his hands. Ms. Reynolds, Judge Harris said coolly, I strongly suggest you control yourself. But Karen wasn't done. She jabbed a finger at him. You're just another affirmative action hire. You shouldn't even be a judge. The room fell deathly silent. And then she made the worst mistake of her life. I swear, if I ever see you outside this courtroom. Bailiffs grabbed her before she could finish. She thrashed in their grip, but it was pointless. Judge Harris simply adjusted his glasses, unfazed. Given your blatant disrespect for this court and your threats against a sitting judge, he said, voice steady, I am extending your sentence beyond what was originally recommended. Karen's face crumpled. No, you can't do that. But it was too late. The gavel slammed down. Sentencing will be issued immediately. She had dug her own grave. Now she had to lie in it. The courtroom buzzed as Karen was hauled out, kicking and screaming. But there was nothing she could do now. The ruling was final. Karen was sentenced to 1 year in jail for trespassing, filing false reports, and threatening a judge. What started as a minor case had spiraled into something much bigger, all because she couldn't control her own hatred. News of her downfall spread, like wildfire. Social media erupted. The video of her courtroom meltdown hit millions of views within days. Memes flooded the internet. Imagine being racist and dumb enough to threaten a judge. Plot twist, she thought the pool was free, but jail is really free. Reporters dug into her past, exposing skeletons she had kept buried, her family's KKK ties, her history of harassing black neighbors, even complaints from past jobs about her racism. Karen was officially canceled. Meanwhile, Justin finally had peace. For the first time in months, he could enjoy his home without fear. No more trespassing. No more false accusations. No more Karen. His neighbors, tired of her antics, rallied behind him. One weekend, they surprised him with a small celebration, decorations, food, and laughter by the pool. It wasn't just about Karen anymore. It was about standing up against hate and supporting each other. Justin smiled as he looked around. He had bought this house to live in peace. And now, that's exactly what he had. As for Karen, she sat in a cold jail cell. No pool, no privilege, no way out. She had spent her life looking down on others. Now she was at rock bottom. And karma doesn't have a lifeguard.